Good morning, and thank you for joining us. We're going to spend some time today talking about the TN visa and the requirements for this type of visa. And we're also going to talk about a question that comes up a lot about whether a TN requires sponsorship. So a few things before we get started. So Scott Legal is a full service immigration law firm. We process many TN visas, both for Canadian nationals and Mexican nationals. Our founder, Ian Scott, actually was on a TN visa for many years, so is very familiar with what you're going through. We will continue doing our webinar series on many different topics, doing at least 2 webinars a month. And at the end of this webinar, we will send out a few things. So one is this PowerPoint you'll see here today. The other is a comprehensive guide on the TN visa, and then also a link where you can sign up for additional webinars. So in terms of our panelists today, my name is Kelly Wiener, and I'm the managing attorney at Scott Legal and have processed many TN visas. We are also very lucky to have our senior associate, Michaela Vrazdova, who is an expert in TNs and has processed many, many of them over the years. So if you have questions as we go through the presentation, please send them in the chat box, and we will, either get your question at the time if it's relevant to what we're talking about, or we'll also reserve time at the end of the webinar for questions. And finally, this webinar is being recorded and will be made available on demand. So without further ado, I'm going to get started talking about the TN visa requirements. All right, so to qualify for a TN visa, you have to meet the following requirements. So this is a visa that is specific to your nationality. So you have to have a passport from either Canada or Mexico to qualify. You don't have to be born in Canada or Mexico. It's based on your nationality, on your passport. And then the second major requirement is you have to be in a profession that appears on a list of professions that's provided in the TN regulations. So there's many different professions on this list that are good, good to look at, many very specific ones: graphic designer, engineer, mathematician, nutritionist, dentist. So, large list of, of professions that you can look at. There's really not, and Michaela will talk about this a little bit more in future slides, there's really not a great category for someone who's coming, for example, to do sales, or someone who's coming just as kind of a business professional, somebody, perhaps qualifying based on a business administration degree. There are some categories such as management consultant that can be, looked at for that. But if somebody is coming kind of more generically, to do sales, or as kind of a manager or executive, sometimes the L1 visa can be more appropriate depending on the circumstances. So the other requirement for the TN is, if you've now shown you are a national of Canada or Mexico, you're a member of the profession on the list, you have to have the required qualifications as listed on this list. So usually that's going to be, a baccalaureate degree. There are some categories that also accept either a post-secondary diploma or post-secondary certificate and 3 years of experience. And then there's, some very, very, very limited categories that you can qualify based on, experience. So the other requirement is you have to have a job lined up. So you can't kind of come in on a TN, to interview for jobs. It has to be a job offer that you've already received for a defined length of time with an employer in the US. And you're being employed to engage in professional activities consistent with the listed profession. So this can sometimes be, one of the most straightforward visas. For example, if you are a dentist and you have, a dental degree, let's say you have a, dental degree from Canada, a license to practice, and you're going to come into the United States to work at a dental practice, then you could, go right ahead and, you just need a letter from your employer and proof of your qualifications. And if you're Canadian, you can go to the border. And if you're, Mexican national, you can go to the consulate. And we'll talk a little bit more about that. So first, let's talk about just what is sponsorship. So let's compare sponsorship for a TN with sponsorship for an H-1B or an L. So for an H-1B is a very compliance-heavy type of visa. When you're applying for an H-1B, the employer has to file a labor certification, with the Department of Labor, verifying they meet certain requirements, that they have provided notice of this filing to their other employees, that they're going to pay a certain wage, that the person's going to work in a specific location. And then also, the L visa is kind of less, compliance heavy than the H-1B, but the L still has its own requirements. So, you have to provide, file a form, Form I-129 with the government. You have to, outline the details of the job, state where the job is going to be, pay an anti-fraud fee. So compared to the TN, the H-1B and the L each have kind of more onerous requirements on the employer, and the employer really does have to be willing to, pay these fees and essentially sponsor the employee for this visa. For the TN visa, it's a bit different. So for the TN, it doesn't require filing any forms with U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services unless you're choosing to file from within the United States for a change or extension of status. So if you're assuming that you're going to be filing either at a port of entry for Canadians or at a U.S. consulate for Mexican nationals, you're not having to file any forms, with U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services. If you're going to a port of entry as a Canadian, what you're doing is bringing the letter explaining the work that you're going to do, the wages you're going to be paid, why this meets the requirements under the list of professions, and then proof of your degree. If you're filing at a consulate, as a Mexican national, you're going to bring that same documentation, but you're going to actually make a visa appointment at the U.S. consulate, and you're going to fill out what's called Form DS-160, where you provide some more information about yourself and the job. So because the nature of the TN is not so compliance heavy, what you can really benefit because there is no required wage, and it's also not location specific. So for example, if you were filing for an H-1B and you said the job is going to be in New York City and it's going to make $100,000 a year, and then the job is now relocated to Texas, you're going to have to file an amendment. You're going to have to change, file a new petition with the government before you can enact that change. So for the TN, it's not location specific. So there's not the same requirement necessarily that if you were based in New York and now you're based in Texas, you don't necessarily need to go back and get a new TN visa as long as you're continuing to abide by, the terms of the visa. So you're providing those professional, like services in the area in which you have, a relevant degree. Additionally, there's not a required wage for the TN. So for the H-1B, there is a required wage you have to pay. You have to pay the higher of the prevailing wage for the position or the actual wage that is paid to similarly situated workers at the location. So that's not the case for the TN. So there's just much more flexibility. TNs also, because they can be part-time, so the wages that can be paid, a lot more flexibility for employers there, particularly if you're only going to be employed on a part-time basis and not full-time. One caveat with that is that obviously the wage should make sense in light of the profession that you're coming to, provide services in. So, if somebody is coming, as an engineer to provide engineering services, very unlikely the government would accept an application that says they're going to make minimum wage, because then that would indicate that are they really coming to provide services at a professional level. So it does still need to make sense in light of the type of application, but there's not a requirement the way there is with the H-1B. So as I mentioned previously, Canadians have this benefit where they can go straight to a port of entry and file for the TN. So this can be an extremely fast process. You arrive a few hours early, before your flight, if you're taking a flight, or you go to a land border, you bring all the documentation with you, they'll review it, let you know, then and there, if you have the visa, they can stamp the visa and let you into the country. The earliest you can try to enter is 10 days prior to the assignment starting. For a Mexican national, you're actually going to be making an appointment at a U.S. consulate, going for a visa interview, and then they would need to stamp your passport, and then you can enter the U.S. with that visa stamp. So another option is that you can file for a TN from within the United States with U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services. So as previously discussed, this would involve actually filing, what's called Form I-129 with the government. So it's something where the employer would have to pay a filing fee. They would have to sign, their authorized representative would have to sign this form that gets filed with the government. And then you can file to either change your status if you're in a valid status, or extend your status if you're already on TN status. Most of the time, applicants will go, to the port of entry or to the consulate. However, especially during COVID, it became a bit more common for people to file with USCIS because there were, less appointment availability at the consulates for Mexican nationals, and also just people were more reluctant to travel. So it is a viable option. You can pay a premium processing fee to get an answer in 15 calendar days. However, very frequently, because people are traveling, they prefer to go to the port of entry or the US consulate. So let's talk briefly about some differences for Canadian and Mexican nationals when it comes to the TN visa. So as discussed previously, Canadians have this very large benefit of being able to apply for the TN at a port of entry. That means they submit their applications with U.S. Customs and Border Protection officers who adjudicate the petitions. They can get a TN for up to 3 years, and these can be renewed indefinitely. So there's no time limit like there is with an H-1B, where after 6 years you either need to find a new status, leave the U.S., or be eligible for an extension based on a pending green card application. For the TN, you can continue to renew the TN or get new TNs without that restriction. That being said, the TN does have a very high bar for non-immigrant intent. So that means you cannot intend to immigrate to the US permanently. So each time you go to apply, if you're maybe now you've spent 3 years, 6 years, 9 years, you're going back maybe for a fourth renewal, you can expect that you might start to get some additional questions on what is your intent. Do you intend to stay in the US permanently? Do you still retain ties to your home country? And you want to be prepared to answer those questions. If your spouse is not Canadian, it's important to know that they will have to go to the consulate to get a TD dependent visa stamp. So this is something where, Canadians get that benefit of being visa exempt. They can go straight to the port of entry. They'll, the Customs and Border Officer, if it's approved, will write the TN, stamp into their passport, and then they can use that to travel. And if your, spouse and children are also Canadian, then they'll also be visa exempt, and they can get those TD dependent visas at the same time. However, if they are not Canadian, they don't have that visa exempt benefit, and they will have to make an appointment, to get the TD stamp in their passport if they want to travel with you to the United States. So for Mexican nationals, they don't have the same benefit. They can't apply at the port of entry. They do have to go to a U.S. consulate. The visa stamps will only be granted in increments of 1 year generally. However, if you have an employer letter and they specify 3 years, then when they enter the United States, they could, be given 3 years in TN status. So it's something where you always want to be checking your I-94 immediately upon entering the United States, because it's not always the case that you would be able to get the 3 years. And sometimes customs officers may be confused, may have not granted it for the right amount of time. So you want to be able to call them back. And there is actually an ability now, to pay an additional or a higher reciprocity fee for the TN and get a visa stamp that's valid for, 48 months. That being said, the most amount of time you can enter the US for on the TN is 3 years. So there may be kind of a difference between the amount of time granted on the actual visa stamp and the amount of time on your I-94. And the I-94 is what controls in terms of saying, how long you're allowed to legally remain in the US. So even if your visa stamp, for example, you pay the higher reciprocity fee as a Mexican national and it's valid, for 4 years, you still, need to be mindful to check your I-94 each time you enter the US and make sure that you're not overstaying that I-94. So another, thing to note just for Mexican nationals is that in certain cases, renewals can be done through mail. So if you've, been on the TN, you've already successfully gotten the TN, you're renewing it, sometimes you are able to mail in your documents as opposed to having to actually go to a, appointment at the consulate. Again, this gained popularity, renewal by mail, this gained popularity during COVID. So can be a viable option, although it should be noted that you do need to be physically in Mexico if you're taking advantage of this option. So now I'm going to turn it over to Michaela to talk to us a bit about some of the more difficult, TN categories that you can encounter.
Thank you so much, Kelly, and good morning, everyone. So I want to discuss two TN categories that are kind of generally more scrutinized by the CBP, consulates, and also USCIS. So the first one is management consultant. And so the reason why this category is kind of more scrutinized, and it's generally kind of a little bit more difficult to get a TN visa under this category, is that it's one of the few TN categories that allows you to qualify just with your experience. So as Kelly mentioned in the beginning, most of the TN professions require that you have at least a bachelor's degree in a particular field, and then the job is related to that degree. But the TN, the management consulting category, allows you to qualify either through your degree, so it's still possible to qualify through a bachelor's degree, but it also allows you to qualify if you have 5 years of experience, either as a management consultant or 5 years of experience in a particular field. So, that's why many kind of like employers and many potential applicants, they often try to kind of like fit in the job descriptions under this category. And so the CBP officers and kind of like USCIS and consulates started to scrutinize this category much more. So let's look at two scenarios. So, let's say that you are kind of like the most, the simplest and the most straightforward scenario would be if you are applying for a TN visa in order to work as a management consultant, in one of the big consulting firms. So, for example, McKinsey or Boston Consulting Group. And you either have a bachelor's degree or you have the 5 years of experience, but you are coming to the US to work for a large management consulting company. So I would say, in this scenario, it would be still pretty straightforward TN, because you are coming to the US to work as a management consultant for a management consulting firm. Now, let's look at second scenario, and let's say that you are coming to the US to work as a management consultant for a US company that does, for example, I don't know, like e-commerce or retail, and you are coming to the US to to work as a management consultant for this company. So, in this scenario, what will be kind of like really important to show is that your role in the company is not permanent, but it's kind of like supernumerary. So, what this means is that, you would generally want to show that you are not coming to work for the US company kind of like as a full-time employee for 3 years. However, if you can make the argument that the company will kind of like, or if the company can make the argument that they will need you for 3 years as a full-time employee, it may be possible. But from our experience, it's usually kind of like more successful if you argue that you are coming, for example, for a period of couple months, or several months, or for a period of 1 year, to kind of help them to implement or work on specific projects. So let's say that this US company is opening a new division in certain retail space, and you have 5 years of experience in this particular industry. And you are coming to kind of like help the US company, to open this new division and to enter the US market. You could qualify as a management consultant, but what would be important to kind of like show in this case would be to kind of describe, in really kind of like detail what your role will be for the company, like what your job duties will be, like how long do you need to stay, why do you need to stay this long, whether you will be paid as an independent contractor or as an employee For management consultants, it's generally better for the application, actually, if you're, coming as a kind of like independent, work for a company as a contractor rather than an employee, because it, kind of shows that you are really coming to work as a consultant. What you would also want to kind of to bring to the TN visa interview is a consulting agreement between you and the US company that would outline in detail like what will be your services, like what services you will be providing for a company. The services should be kind of like like researching particular field, like making recommendations to the management, making recommendations like how to, in this case, as I gave the example, like how to enter the US market, like making recommendations like how to increase, profits, how to make the operations better. So generally, kind of like the position of the management consultant should be more focused, on kind of like making recommendations, like doing research to the management and to the company in general, how to generally, improve their operations and improve the efficiency of the company. Also, another thing to keep in mind is, if you are qualifying under the management consulting category, and you are qualifying under the work experience, it's not enough just to kind of like bring your resume to the interview, because the officers will want to see the actual kind of employment letters from your previous employers to make sure that you kind of like really have either 5 years of experience as a management consultant or 5 years of experience in your particular industry. So, what you would want to do is to kind of reach out to your previous employers and ask them to write very detailed employment letters that will kind of specify, the months and years you worked for a company, kind of your job duties, the projects that you worked on, to kind of really demonstrate that you have the necessary qualifications. The employment letters should be on the employer's, the previous employer's letterhead, and you should bring the originally signed letters to your interview, because that's what the officers will want to see. In case you are qualifying through your education, in that case, you will have to bring the original diploma and the original transcripts to your interview. And kind of the second category I just kind of briefly wanted to discuss is the economics category. And so this category used to be kind of pretty broad, and kind of like many Canadians and Mexican nationals were qualifying under this category up until 2017. In 2017, USCIS issued a memo, and they very narrowed like who can qualify under the economics category. So before, many people who were working in the US as financial analysts or market research analysts or marketing specialists were able to kind of fall under the economics category. But in 2017, USCIS issued this memo, and they basically said that, the people who are coming to the US on the TN under the economics category should really just kind of specialize in either microeconomics or macroeconomics, and just kind of like gave very specific definitions as to who can qualify. So, in 2017, what happened is that many people who were in the US with kind of like different degrees and were here as market research analysts and financial analysts had to kind of have a discussion with their employers, if they need to kind of like switch to a different visa, or if the job description can be kind of adjusted to fall under the new definition of economics as USCIS provided. Perfect. So now let's look at the TN application process in more detail. So as Kelly already mentioned, Canadians have a big advantage of just being able to apply for a TN visa at any port of entry. So they can apply at, when they're flying to the US at an airport, they can apply at a land border. The kind of, big advantage of this process is that, like let's say that you are a Canadian and you find a company in the US that is willing to sponsor you for a TN. You can kind of, once you have the TN employment letter and all the supporting documents, you can just show up at the border and apply for a TN, at any time you want. So, once you get an offer from a US company, the process for Canadians can be, very, very, very fast. What you do need to kind of bring with you to the interview are, there are several documents, and you do need to bring originals of many documents. So that's a really important thing to keep in mind. So you obviously, you will need to bring your Canadian passport. You will need a letter from the US company kind of outlining, several things. So the letter should kind of specify which TN category you are applying under, should kind of describe what the US company is doing, how, like how many employees does the company have. The letter should also have the company's website in it, because the CBP officers, they often kind of like check the website, like if it's kind of like a large, well-known company, that they don't usually check the website. But like, let's say that you are coming to work for like a smaller company, they do like to kind of like check the website just to, make sure that the offer is legitimate and that there is kind of like a bona fide offer of employment. So, the website should kind of list what the company is doing, what services it's providing. If the company has some well-known clients, they should be listed on the website. The website should have kind of like a contact information, like where the company is located, and just kind of like basic information like that. Then the TN letter should also kind of specify what your job will be in the US. So, one thing is job title, but the job title is kind of, important to show that you are, that you will be, to just kind of like show what you'll be doing in the US. But what is more important than the job title are the job duties. And the job duties should basically, so like, let's say that you are coming to work as an accountant, the job duties in the TN letter should be kind of consistent with, like what accountant usually does according to the Department of Labor. So, the job duties should also be, detailed. And, they should also kind of, the job duties should also be, the job should be explained in a way that a CBP officer, like who has no idea, because some of the TN categories are kind of like more complicated. And sometimes if the job description is kind of like, like very technical, and the officer may not necessarily kind of like understand like what you will be doing in the US. So, what CBP like usually like is like kind of like for a job description to be more in kind of like a layman terms, or if there are technical terms, they should be explained. So when the officer kind of like looks at the job description and kind of looks at what that kind of occupation, like what the people in that industry usually do, they are able to kind of like make a decision like like yes, this matches the definition. The TN letter should also just kind of briefly describe if you are qualifying under your, with your education, should kind of like describe, like what is the major of your bachelor's or master's, what relevant courses did you take, or if you're qualifying under the work experience, for example, for the management consultant category, it should kind of describe the experience you have. But that will also be kind of like more detail in the, in the employment letter you will provide to the officer. As I mentioned, if you are qualifying under, with kind of like your education, you will have to bring your original diploma and the original transcripts. Again, they, the officers do want to see the originals. So that may, take some time. You may reach out to the school, or you may kind of like order the original transcripts if you don't have them anymore. But you should definitely have the originals, because if you just have a unofficial transcript, they may just kind of send you back, and then you would have to go back and reapply. If you're qualifying under the work, with your work experience, then you should, as I mentioned, you should have the original letter from your previous employer or employers. And also, like if you have any relevant professional licenses in your field, you should also bring the original licenses. About the degree, I just kind of quickly wanted to mention that, if your degree is from Canada, US, or Mexico, you can just bring the diploma and the transcripts. But like, let's say that you studied in some other country, then you would have to get an evaluation of your degree, just to kind of say that, the evaluation should indicate that the degree you got in that country is kind of equivalent to a US, bachelor's degree in the field that is kind of necessary for that particular TN category. So, and kind of like the last thing I wanted to mention about kind of Canadians applying at a port of entries is that, some port of entries are kind of optimized for faster TN processing. So especially if you are applying for a TN for a first time, it's kind of recommended that you go and apply at one of these port of entries, and they are listed on the CBP website. And one other thing to keep in mind, or what we kind of generally recommend to our clients is to, if you are applying for a TN, to kind of go sometimes, like from Monday to Friday, because on the weekends they usually have less officers, or or there may be kind of like less experienced officers. So we do usually recommend that you go, during from Monday to Friday. So now let's go over the procedures, for Mexican nationals and how they can apply for TN. So Mexican nationals, unfortunately, they don't have the advantage Canadian nationals have, and they do have to go to a consulate and apply for a TN visa at a US consulate. So, what this generally means is that the procedure is just kind of, it usually takes longer for Mexican nationals to get a TN visa, just because they have to schedule an interview appointment at one of the consulates in Mexico. It usually, during COVID, it was the timelines were kind of, it was really long. I would say now it's, it still takes, a few months to get an appointment, but the timelines got much better. So what will you need, like in terms of supporting documents, and how can you kind of apply for a TN visa? So in terms of supporting documents, it's really kind of the same for, Mexican nationals and Canadian nationals. So you will need to bring all the documents, as I already mentioned, the Canadians nationals have to bring. You will also have to submit form DS-160. So this is a form every time you apply for a visa in the US, you have to submit a DS-160 form. So you will have to do that. You will have to pay a visa fee. And then you will have to schedule a biometrics appointment where, this will be before your interview appointment, where you will just attend an appointment, like they'll take your photo, take your biometrics, and then you will have to attend your interview appointment. You schedule at a particular consulate. And then, if your TN visa is approved, as Kelly mentioned, you will have the option to either get the TN visa for 1 year or for 4 years. In the past, it used to be that Mexican nationals could only get the TN visa for 1 year. Recently, there has been an update in kind of like the reciprocity schedule. And you know, I believe like the price for the TN visa for 1 year, you know, is around like $100 something. The price for a TN visa for 4 years is only I believe like $300 more, and it will give you kind of the opportunity to go back and forth, you know, for 4 years. So there is definitely kind of benefit of paying the higher reciprocity fee for the TN visa for 4 years if you are a Mexican national. And in case you are renewing your TN visa, you may be able to renew it by mail. But, you know, this is really kind of like, you know, like whether you qualify or not, you will kind of see when you submit your DS-160 application, pay the visa fee, then you will be prompted to answer, you know, certain questions through the kind of like the system, the online system consulate has. And if you know, if you do qualify, then they kind of instruct you to mail the supporting documents. You know, you will still have to kind of like mail your the TN letter, you know, your passport, and kind of like mail the supporting documents to the consulate, and then they will kind of make a decision on the application. So but you know, as Kelly mentioned already before, you know, some people think that if they are already in the US and kind of like work in the US for a US company, and they do qualify for the renewal by mail, you know, they can just kind of like mailing their documents from the US to the consulate in Mexico and get the visa renewed. And you know, then they will, you know, the consulate will mail them the passport back. But unfortunately, that's not the case, because one of the requirements for the renewal by mail is that you are physically present in Mexico. So you know, so you would still have to leave the country, you would still have to leave the US and just kind of like mailing your documents from Mexico to the consulate, and then wait for them to make a decision and mail you the documents back. You know, I would say like sometimes, you know, the renewal process by mail is faster, but sometimes it's honestly just kind of like faster to attend the interview. But again, you know, like the procedures just kind of like will depend on the specific consulate where, you know, you got the visa, and where you will be renewing the visa. So now applying from within the US, you know, you, as Kelly mentioned, you do have the option to kind of file a petition, either a change of status petition or extension of status petition with USCIS. You know, I would say like the biggest advantage of this process is probably for Mexican nationals is that it's kind of it's fast. You know, if you pay for a premium processing. So, you know, let's say that you are in the US and you are a Mexican national, you want to extend your status in the US, and, you know, the next available appointment is in, you know, 3 months. And you know, you kind of like need to extend it as soon as possible, then you know, you could do so by filing, or the employer would have to file the extension of status petition with USCIS. The standard processing time is around like 3 to 6 months at least. But if you pay for a premium processing, which costs $2,500, USCIS would then make a decision on the application within 15 days. So, you know, in some cases there is benefit of kind of, you know, doing extending your status with USCIS. You know, I would say kind of like the cons of this process are, for example, the higher filing fees. So there is a fee for the I-129 petition, which is around $460. If you want the premium processing, you know, that's additional $2,500. If you have a dependent, you know, there are additional filing fees. So the process it usually costs, you know, like more than, you know, than if you just kind of apply at a consulate. And another thing to keep in mind is that some of the categories, like for example, management consultant or economist, like USCIS scrutinizes them like much more than the CBP and the consulate. So you know, in some cases it wouldn't be advisable to kind of apply with USCIS, depending on, you know, like which category you are applying under. Perfect. And now let's go over some tips and common TN visa pitfalls. A general tip is to, if you are a Canadian, is to just call ahead to the port of entry, where you will be applying. Because as I said, like some port of entries, especially like the land crossings, like they may have specific days and times, like where, like during which they kind of process TN visa applications. So you just want to call and make sure that, at the time, like on the day and time you will be crossing the border, they are able to adjudicate your application. Also, if you are a Mexican national, you want to kind of look at the website of the consulate where you are applying for a TN visa, and just kind of like make sure that you follow the instructions, like you bring all the documents they want you to bring to the TN visa interview, just to make sure that you have all documents you need on the day of the interview, and you don't kind of have to go back or send them additional documents. Another thing is that so someone from the U.S. company will have to sign the TN visa employment letter, and the person, it can be someone from HR, it can be someone from your department, you will be kind of working at, but it should be someone who is familiar with the job you are coming to perform. And you should let them know the day and time you are either planning to cross, or day and time of your interview, so they are available to pick up phone. Because sometimes, especially consular officers don't do it as much, but CBP officers, sometimes they do call the person from the US company to just kind of make sure again that there is a like a bona fide job offer, the job offer is legitimate. So the person who is signing the letter should really be kind of familiar with like your qualifications and kind of like the job you are coming to perform in the US. And as I mentioned, it's going to be important to bring originals of the degree, transcripts of the TN visa, employment letter, and if you do qualify through the work experience, original of the letter from the previous employer. Recently, like CBP can also be like picky, like what they want to see exactly on the letter. The letter should have a letterhead, and the letterhead should also contain specific information like the name of the company, website, address, contact information. So CBP can be very kind of specific what they want to see in the letter. So you should definitely kind of have an immigration attorney review the letter and make sure that everything what's supposed to be there is on it, so they don't kind of deny the TN, and so you don't have to kind of reapply. Last thing I wanted to mention here is that TN visa is a non-immigrant visa that requires that you show that you have a non-immigrant intent, meaning that you don't plan to move to the US, indefinitely, and you plan to kind of come back to your home country at some point. I will say, this is the immigrant intent, the non-immigrant intent issue with TN visas is usually not an issue. Like, let's say that you are applying for a TN for the first time or second time, and you kind of like haven't been living in the US for a long period of time. In those cases, they don't usually want to see like any supporting documents about your kind of ties to your home country. But let's say that like you have been living in the US like on either like TN or other visas for like, I don't know, like 15, 20 years, then this issue may eventually kind of come up. And the CBP officer just kind of like may ask you to show that you still have ties to either Canada or Mexico. So how you would usually demonstrate this is if you own properties in somewhere outside the US, you could show evidence of that. If you have like retirement accounts or, you know, like bank accounts, like savings in those countries, you could submit evidence of that. If you have close family members, you know, like living in those countries, you could submit evidence of that. But again, like this would normally only come up after, you know, like you have been living in the US for kind of like extended period of time. Perfect.
All right, so I think that is all we have. So it looks like we only have one question that has come in, or a couple questions coming in. So one, after getting the TN, do we have to inform the employer, or the border security will let them know? So that would be, you would inform the employer. So you would need to provide proof of your TN visa to your employer so they can complete the process to confirm that you're legally permitted to work in the United States. So then, and Michaela, there's this question, if you could answer, if after getting the visa on the border, 10 days before the start date of the job, they're unable to join the employer and they go back to Canada, is the TN invalid? Can they use it in the future for another employer?
Yeah, so let's say that your start date, you know, just moves, you know, then you could use the same TN, you know, to work for the same employer. But, you know, in case you do want to change employer, like either like in this scenario, like you never even started working for the employer, or like let's say that you start working for a US company, but then you find another job. Like every time you change employer, you do need to apply for like basically a new TN. So you would have to go kind of like back, you know, if you're a Canadian national, you would have to go back to the border and, you know, like present a new employment letter from the new employer, and then the CBP would have to approve the TN for that new employer. Because they, you know, every time your job or your employer changes, they want to make sure that the job duties and the kind of like the job you will be doing in the US qualifies under the TN visa regulations. So yeah, every time before you start working for a new employer, you have to go back and basically you know, reapply.
Perfect. So it looks like those are all the questions we had. So thank you so much. Thank you, Michaela, for sharing your knowledge. Sorry, one quick question before we close. What's the downside of a small company offers employment? So this is fine. It's fine for there to be a small company. One thing to consider is that, you know, oftentimes, especially at the border, you know, the officers will Google Google the company. They'll do an internet search. You know, oftentimes they want to see the website included. So if the company doesn't have much of a presence, that's something where they could, you know, raise additional questions. But certainly, as long as there's proof that there is, you know, professional work available in one of the relevant TN categories, and you, the applicant, have a degree or the qualifications for that category, you know, you certainly can still apply even with a small company. All right. Thank you, everyone. And I hope you have a wonderful day.